Well, last time I made some kind of attempted humorous intro comparing this to one of those, gospel cable networks or whatever. I got 4 or 5 of the dirtiest letters from some of the ministers. I thought better of them after that. 2 right quick. It was nobody's fault, but Kyroots, I don't think, put the right kind of pronunciation, etc. I just wanted to read right quick before we go into it. Was number 2, and Kyroots said, even after he had accepted, embraced, and understood the situation, there was this one man who still did not care for any of the analyses available. You don't have to. It's nice. I heard a few mercy huns like, well, well, it's nice you knew I went to the trouble to reread it, and you went, I would have done the same for you. Well, all right, I won't reread that one because I just noticed it has been requested. Okay, here we go. And Kyroots said, the ordinary, just to maintain their present position, must believe that they are individual products of unseen forces. This, as you know, we have all been talking about this off and on all kinds of directions. The physical, overt manifestations of it would seem to be religion, psychology being the real prime one now, to most people. That what you are in some way is a result. If you don't like product, those of you are getting better to look somewhere a little beyond objects into closer to the area of processes, verbs, and action. But that people must feel just to maintain their position. There's nothing wrong, just to stay upright. You have got to nowadays, and you always did, but nowadays I was using psychology as opposed to religion and being on the sides of the gods and etc. Just being a decent, humane person nowadays, but with the right kind of internal makeup. Even though you would have problems if you're ordinary and you're going to whine and complain, even if you do not turn it into a public growth industry. I'm glad that was way down at the bottom because I don't want anybody to ask me about that, because we have some members here tonight who I was going to fill out the chairs, and we had some people here who they're out here in the parking lot. They've never had the opportunity because of their poor dressing habits to get on into the big time shows, and so we were going to discuss what brought them to this sorry state in life. Of course, I was here trying to coach them and give them terms, psychological terms, what few I knew, because all they could do was talk about cheap wine, mad dog, and at any rate, that they have got to, just to maintain their present position, believe that they are the results of unseen forces. Think about it. I'm not sure there's need to say a lot more. It has always been that if you were that way now, if you were a very strict fundamentalist religious person, you would believe that you were a result, to go back to the great Western tradition. I'll start using Islam or Hinduism because some of you are Presbyterians and you think you know it all anyway. But you would believe, even if you were still religious, that you are the result of something. Because in the same way that the mind can only think by being a plagiarist, so too a man cannot. You cannot take a person suddenly and say, all right, if you just jump around a corner, a cosmic corner, in the middle of a man's life, forget Dante, wandering off in the middle of his life in the wrong way. All right, consider Dante. Why not? Hell, he's not immune to this stuff. But anyway, you're suddenly there in life, some decent middle-aged person with a good mortgage, some decent rate. You're on your second or third wife or husband. And suddenly around a cosmic corner, someone leaps out and says, who? Of course, I guess they should say, beforehand they say, this is a metaphysical question, so that you'd be properly prepped. And they say, who are you? Now, you can think about it a second. I know it's been philosophical and metaphysical and otherwise of people believing that you should know yourself and study yourself and etc. But think about if, indeed, you thought the voice of the heavens, reality itself, was my little joke of somebody jumping around a cosmic corner and say, who are you? There is no way that you could answer that. There's no part of the human nervous system that could answer that without you, and whatever word you use, is presenting yourself as an end result of something that went before. At the very least, you're genetically a product. If the cosmic spirit jumped out and says, who are you? And let's say that you're not real metaphysically inclined. I mean, since some of you are roofers and accountants, I know how your mind works. And so maybe you're not all that metaphysically inclined and you're not sure that, this is a trick question. And then perhaps especially if you're an accountant, you think, they don't like my looks, the spirit. And so you think, well, it's some sort of subtle attack on my physical demeanor, my appearance. And so your answer is, whatever it said, you'd say, well, did you jump out and select me because of the size of my nose? I mean, I know that's all my life. Serial almost decided to come back out of the grave and thought, hey, I wouldn't look so bad nowadays. The point was, even at the crudest level, if a man had no other response, he cannot identify himself, he cannot feel that he is anything without being the result, the end product of something. And at the crudest possible level, down in the basement, that'll keep you alive, you would say, well, all right, what I am, what you see now, is overweight, as thin as my hair is, as big as my nose is, as bad as my health's been. If you knew my mother and father, in fact, my grandparents, they both died in early, well, hell, they died so early, they died before my parents were born. It's run down the line. It's genetic, the way I look. Just testing if anybody was actually... I know your weight, but getting too serious and your mind just keeps going along in serious ways. For those of you, you're really good, I don't think anybody really notices. I hadn't wanted to think about it, but now I've already done it. Periodically, it's just in the last few days, there's a Kyroot that right at the end, it was a setup perfect. And truly, the last line ran askew. And no one's ever requested those. There's one just several nights ago. They got right down to the end. And if I'd stopped it before the last several words, I'm sure that everybody in here would have said, well, all right, I can fill that in. Kyroot's going to say, and it wasn't quite that. When I say it wasn't quite that, it was not quite that enough that it didn't make any sense. The punchline made sense, but it didn't have any connection to the setup. And I noticed no one said a word. And the part that I didn't want to think about was that, it was too weird, you didn't even notice it, you went ahead and filled it in. Which is, it didn't cost extra on cable for you people at home. It's why in the middle sometimes, it's like you just jumped out of the bushes and tripped Dante as he was trying to rhapsodize about taking a different... I think it would be fun to jump out of the bushes and hit that son of a bitch if we had a frozen version of Robert Frost and let them work it out. We're back to... Everyone would have to present themselves, you understand this, at the physical level there is nothing strange whatsoever. A person would have to present themselves, if indeed they were brought before the great cosmic tribunal, and somebody said, all right, who are you? Who are you? If nothing else, you'd say, all right, if I got time, I'll start at the most basic, and you're staying there on your feet, sweating bullets, and there you are before the cosmic forces trying to get going. You say, well, all right, now I know I don't look all that presentable, I know I got a few pounds on me, but my mama, from the South, God bless her, and I don't know, from that Anglo-Saxon Irish stock, she was a real chunky woman. She was real fleshy, and so was my father. And so, the product of something. Now, to get a little past that, if the cosmic forces went, get to the real stuff. Everybody's ugly and fat or thin, and get to the real stuff. Who are you? The only thing that you could come up with is really what I'm getting at, that is why it took so long, is because there is no real specific point. It sounds like it, but those of you who are good, you got to realize that the point's not it. That if you had to describe what you are, the only thing you can do, the only thing the human nervous system can do, is bring out in some way, in some words, a presentation of you, let's say psychologically now, personality-wise, intellectual-wise, not physical, but that you are the result of unseen forces. There is no exception. It's not stupidity, it's not short-sightedness, it's not simply a matter of limited intellectual ability. What else can you do? Well, we can take a few seconds, and if you've got any sense at all, if you follow the question, it's nice and straightforward, there's nothing else you can do. if they really said, who are you? Forget the physical and the looks and all that. We all got problems. But who are you? What makes you what you are? The only thing you could present is, well, I am the result of this. Forget whether you'd be complaining a lot or complaining a little, blaming it on society, blaming it on your mother, most on your father. That doesn't matter. You could only present yourself as being the result of unseen forces at work. What'd that do? How's that done? Now we're going to have those guys write back some of those imaginary letters. Remember that guy and his brother that he said that he thought at times we were giving out advice, and his brother said no. The letter didn't say it, but I think that they ended up in somewhat of a tiff over that. If it'll clear it up, I'll read the punchline. I know this will help for all of you attorneys. The ordinary, to just maintain their present position, must believe that they are the individual product, the result of certain unseen forces. The addendum is the reason that leaves cannot talk is that they find themselves far too fungible. If you do not know fungible, I guess it's fungible means things that can be replaced, things that are not unique. Like in the law, if you left a dollar bill in somebody's care and said, hold this for me until I get back, and you came back and they lost it, and they give you another dollar, the law will not support you saying, wait a minute, I wrote down the serial number of that dollar, that was my favorite dollar, and this is not it. And the guy says, well, it's not. I spent it or I lost it, but here's another dollar. Currency is fungible. That one is just as good as the other. There is no inherent, there is no useful, there is no practical singularity, uniqueness, for those of you that are up to date with the use of the word, unusualness, to currency. When I think about leaves, and I assume you would probably guess that we're talking about humans anyway. Kyroots started to say squirrels and fish. But things that would be too fungible, amongst other reasons I was going to present to you, could not talk. Even if leaves had the nervous system ability, if fish did, fish are so fungible. We'll just take a quick shot and I'll turn the page. They're so fungible, if everything else being equal, and they had all of the inherent possibilities, properties, coit physical systems to talk. Simply being as fungible as they are, they couldn't talk. You got to be, in a relative sense, as singular, as unique as humans like to believe they are. If you were not, for those of you that still feel guilty about the water in your basement, for those of you that believe you're ugly, remember this. I'm not arguing with you. If you say you're ugly, who am I to say not? If you were not as ugly as you are, you couldn't think. Of course, if you're good, you can say, well, I could be real beautiful and be so beautiful I couldn't stand it. Yeah, you're right. Except, it's too late to do anything about it. It's just whatever you are, you're non-fungible, which is one of the few claims that humans, without knowing it, could support in their wild stampede of dancing through a Warner Brothers cartoon about, yes, I'm unique. There's only one of me. And of course you look at somebody funny and they go, hey, don't look at me funny. I saw a guy on TV. He was talking. He was a doctor of psychology. Who are you? Nobody. Guy told me, well, plus I bought his book. $29.95. The name of the book is You Are Somebody Unique. And the whole book made sense. Not like, this kind of phony baloney stuff. You have got to be absolutely convinced, that's sanity, that you are, although you may have a few things in common with other people here in Montana and Norway, but that when it gets down to it, by God, you are an individual. There is only one of you. Elvira Gruntrapper, or whatever that name was, whatever your family name was. If it were not for that, if it were not for the feeling of being non-fungible, you could not talk. I guess we spent enough time because you don't want to hear that. You don't even want to hear me try to prove that. Well, I can't resist this. You do understand that from a more complex view, not my view, but just from a certain more complex view, that you are not unique. Look for an intellectual gag reflex for people that say, I'm unique. I would have to refer them to the guest speaker if we get around to it, that pointed out sans sarcasm. It did not say a word. There was nothing on that page. I saw it before the meeting. There was nothing that said, reader, do a little dramatic sarcasm or try and put on a sardonic face, but don't let it get stuck there because, you can't undo it. Or is that you're crossing your eyes? It said the guest speaker pointed out that yes, he agreed. Yes, image is everything. If image is mostly all you got. So when ordinary people, when they say, I'm unique, I'm not rich yet, I'm not as famous as I plan to be in my chosen field, I'm pursuing my talents forthwith, à pace, à tempo. So I am not yet what I aspire to be, what I am sure I will be, but even now, in my incomplete state, I am unique. People got to believe that. There's nothing wrong with it. But now, from a more expansive view, if you believe from any meaningful view, intellectually, forget otherwise, we're talking about the neural revolution, a different way of thinking, an expanded way. If you think in some useful way that out there in the street, from presidents to popes to prime ministers to rabbis to you at street level, if you think that there is something unique, singular about you in some striking, useful, meaningful way, then I'm glad that you had the opportunity to have that speaker reassure you that, yes, image is everything. It's just simply not true. There is no meaningful way that any ordinary level that people are that different. It's not an attack on people, but they have to absolutely believe otherwise. You cannot make an ordinary sane person believe that. I mean, there's no reason you would try. If you could make somebody believe that, the end result in their case would be, by Western terminologies, they would be at least neurotic and probably psychotic. They would not be a reasonable functioning person if, indeed, in some way you could take them. If you say, hey, do you realize that the whole world, everybody thinks they're different and individual? Yeah. It's not true. In some way you could make them believe that. You would not have served any useful purpose. They would go into a severe funk. That's postmodern Freudian talk, I think. I don't know. Sure. Either that or post-Mingus talk, when they used to treat people. But, back to the point, they have to believe otherwise, and yet it's not true. And you don't have to look anywhere. You don't even have to watch me make another hand gesture. All you got to do is know a little bit about you, not waste your whole life studying you. You just have to see, as far as there being something individual, unique, and you may be able to sing better than anybody in your family. You may be able to play the accordion better than anybody in the world, which everybody can, and even anybody can. You may be able to do something special, but you do not know anything if you think that at just the basic level of being alive, that you are in any way Mr. or Mrs. Wonderful. Make us all gag. It's a figure of speech, of course, because ordinary people are wonderful. They're supposed to believe they're wonderful. And anybody who knew anything would not tell Mr. or Ms. Wonderful that they're not wonderful. If called upon to feel like you dead in the eye, nobody asked my advice, but I already told you, you should always support the basic foolishness of life. That should be one of your... It's either that or we're all going to get run over. It's going to be bad news. When people will be Mr. and Ms. Wonderful, if they look your way, you look just as impressed, like, well, I'm staggered by it. But if you know anything, not about them, if you know anything about being alive, you know that that is not true. That is almost as fungible, that is replaceable with nothing singular about them as leaves. That's about it. Which is another reason why fashion is so important. That I am somebody. You do understand, though, don't you, that if you stay at that level, you can dress, you get all sorts of hairdos, face redone, do everything, nice hobbies, but you are fungible. And you cannot think. You'll never have any idea of being anything different as long as your thinking is fungible. And there, of course, there's a problem because somebody can hear that and go, all right, I agree. I'm sick of thinking the same old crap. Where do I start? Well, there's sort of a problem when they say, well, where do I start? I watched a few of these shows and you convinced me. Up until now, I have been a reformed Anglo Church of England existentialist carpet weaver. Republican. But after listening to your show, it's like I have worn out that whole approach. I am sick of it, so I'm prepared to do this. I will convert to Catholicism. I will become a, you understand? In other words, they can repudiate what they think. Say, I'll go in the other direction. It was noted, I'm sure we won't get around to it either, and an addendum tonight was a little play on words, which wasn't the point necessarily, but that those who live, two-eyed people who live next to a railroad track wherein they run off as they must, or actually not a railroad track, they're a piece of one, that they run off in both possible directions out of sight. Then you have a deuce of a time, which can be spelled two ways, but you have a deuce of a time trying to tell exactly which way the train's going. But if, of course, you're ordinary and fungible in your thought, you can say, well, that's not true. If I was standing there and the train's coming from here to there, and you say you can't tell which way it's going, I say, well, sure I can. It's going that way. Well, they call us again. Shit. See, I talked myself right into it, thought we had them fooled, but if it's going, all right, try it this way even. Then it's going this way, that way. They can tell. They just ask, all right, it's going that way. If you're driving in a 3D world with a 2D brain and two lights, you'll have a deuce of a time. You should always, if you're driving through a tunnel, only go in one direction. But it's the same thing. And then this cosmic spirit could fall out of the woodwork if they had them in tunnels and say, all right, which way are you going? You think, what a dumb question, I'm going that way. And you'd point toward the front of the car. Am I right? Who's going to tell you otherwise? Well, that's the kind of guy you are. If you're going to get in a car and drive, you normally go the way which the car is going. Very few sane people will get in an automobile and put it in reverse and try to go any great distance. Like drive from St. Louis to Davenport. Just most people won't do it. We'll play like we finished that one, right? One guy says he looks at it like this, according to the Kyroots paper. He says, you know you're engaged in revolutionist-style thought when you realize that no one but you might understand what you're thinking, and it doesn't matter. Think about it. I could start tearing up, if you hadn't done it yourself, stories from biblical literature, from non-religious ancient writings, to fairy tales up to date, to comic books, if I knew enough, or movies. Don't lose your place. And if you tried to apply this, it's got to reach some new level of insanity. How about all the people that went off on these great mystical adventures? All the people that did it in a spiritual context in the stories, people who did it supposedly historically. The Golden Fleece and the Great Wars, the Trojan Wars, all the way from that to Adam and Eve and Moses and the Promised Land, people being driven out, and Confucius talking about unsuitable citizens being run from one land to another, from one district to another. Then on the other hand, unsuitable leaders and ministers in the political context. That the whole thing is about not being able to reach some particular goal, not being able to complete some journey. Look at it on the basis of thinking, which is all it is, or else you're just playing a kiddie game, which is all right, it's an adventure, to say, well, I'll go out and find the Golden Fleece. I'm not even sure it exists, but I'll find it, or I'll go look for the chalice, or I'll go look for the Holy Grail. I'll go do something physical. It's a hobby. But at any better level at all, if you aspire to be at all as thoughtful as a leaf, particularly on a hardwood tree, then you got to understand that the basis of it is in the nervous system. But what would the nervous system be? Take this. What would be, who could you get dumb and fungible enough to go off on a great adventure and to find the treasure and then realize, I found it and nobody will be able to see it but me, which that's one problem. I could make a story out of that and get some ordinary people to go, that's heavy. call Spielberg or somebody, and there's a new science fiction movie. Because they could almost take that. And I spent my whole life searching for this great treasure, and I found it, and it turned out that it was some sort of invisible cosmic piece of debris of such a wavelength that matched only the ability of my eyes in the electromagnetic spectrum to see, and that no one, did you say no one? No one but me can see it. And I did all of this, and only I could see it. Now, wouldn't that make a great fade after an hour and a half or whatever the movie is? And there's the guy, and going, But see, that wasn't all of it. No, this is not movie time, this is Kyroots. That you might be engaged, you might suspect that you're engaged in revolutionary style thinking if, several things here, I got several fingers, if you begin to realize that what you're thinking that no one else may understand, and you don't care. The last one is what would put the wreck caboose on an ordinary story, an ordinary movie. You would have to, at the very least, be non-human. Inhuman sounds better, I guess, at least spooky. To go on this great quest, this great adventure, and to find what you were looking for. Let's just say at least plus or minus, for those of you in the real estate business. That you more or less found what you were looking for and realized that no one else is going to understand it. They either can't see it if you're still that crude to put it on a physical level, or else it's going to be something that, now I understand it, and then simultaneously realize no one else. Because if you understand anything out of the ordinary, you got to understand where it is in the context of everyone else's thoughts. And so you immediately realize, oops, now I understand it, but hell, nobody else in the world is going to understand it if I tell them. That tends to give people, I don't know. They get somewhat upset, according to the stories, if this has actually ever happened. In case you hadn't noticed, the world is full of tales. I just sharpened it a bit, of that same nature. They're just not that strict at the end. But religion is full of such stories. You just didn't recognize it. Because I said to find it and then immediately realize, wait a minute, this thing's invisible. Nobody's going to be able to see it after all my work. It's throughout mythology, legends, fables, and religion, except they do not go and put a period like the guy finds it and goes, uh-oh, nobody's going to see this. Theirs, it's more like a whole bunch of commas and hems and haws. It's the reproductive system of the secondary world, in case you hadn't noticed, that Kyroots pointed out tonight. That in the secondary world, anything can become the environment for something else. Anything can become the background. Everything can give birth to something else simply by being its background. So the stories go, the background just seems to change. That people go on this great adventure and they don't quite get there. And you're left at the end of the verse or the book or the Holy Bible or the fable. It's kind of like that the guy goes, well, I did all this. I went through all of the challenges. And I thought I was surely Hercules revisited. And yet, and there's always some little fly in the ointment. Some little tip of the iceberg. I hate to leave with just one cliche. No ordinary person, that is, no ordinary thought, I forget physical treasures and etc., would be looking for something intellectually, find it, realize at the same time, well, now I understand that, but nobody else is going to, and not care. They're almost mutually exclusive, except for this. We all like justice, don't you? It's like living next door to a firehouse. For all you people who smoke in bed up here, is the justice is, of course, people that really are going to care, they ended up around some biblical fable. They end up in the kind of story that they almost find it, and it's like right at the end they trip or turn their ankle. In other words, they don't actually ever get to the point of finding it, so they have to face up to the fact, wait a minute, now I understand this, but I am now going to be a society, nay, perhaps a nation of one. As long as you trip just before you get there, you don't have to do that. And so justice do prevail. Life do look after itself. If you want to be real crude, since we only got a minute or so, you could also say that if there was ever any danger of people ever on some large scale getting interested in trying to think in a certain non-polarized way, life is already protecting itself. Not that it has to. On the basis that I could suggest that people, what do they call it, subconsciously, here it goes, people subconsciously know that what I just said was true. They know, people that think, wait a minute, I'll go ahead and put the rest of my children through graduate school. Well, I'll get their masters. And then I'm selling everything. I'm going to leave my wife or husband, and I'm going to India, Nepal. I'm going there, and I'm going to find the secret. I'm going to do what my heart's always told me I should do. And then they turn their ankle. They get a real bad paper cut, and they can't go. What I was going to say is life protects itself on the basis that subconsciously they know that if they did find what they're looking for, it's not going to be it's going to be this situation. They wouldn't know how to describe it. They just know, I'm going to go to all that trouble, and then something's going to happen. It's kind of like people that you may have heard of, real philosophers, or it's really metaphysical people, some of the ones that live around the Delta region of Mississippi. They'll say things like, pretty common, they have a certain sight into it. Hey, why should I go to school? I mean, I'll go, I could be in med school. I'll go and I'll spend like 20 years in school, get my diploma, do all the internship, and they'll say, you're now a doctor. I'll walk across the street and a damn car will hit me and I'll die. And I will have wasted, 20 years. It's that sort of thing. Good night.